Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming and welcome to the Internet of Water webinar series. My name is Ashley Ward and I'm a Senior Policy Associate at the Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. We're happy to have you today while we learn about HydroShare. HydroShare is a trusted open source data repository for the water community. Today, you're going to learn the ins and outs and the best practices of storing, sharing, collaborating on, and publishing data in HydroShare. We will also cover how to use CUAHSI's free apps like CUAHSI JupyterHub and MATLAB online in conjunction with HydroShare. But just a few housekeeping issues before I turn it over. At the end of the webinar today, we do have a poll, so we ask that you stick around during the Q&A and give us some feedback on your experience. Also, just a reminder that we are recording today's webinar. The recording of the webinar and the slides that you'll see today will be shared. If you registered for the webinar, we have your email address and you'll get an email, but you can also find an announcement will be posted on our social media and links on our website. There are two ways in which you can communicate with us today. If you have a question related to the webinar content, we ask that you use the Q&A box. And I will then interject, ask your questions to our speaker, who I'll introduce in just a moment. However, if you're having troubles or have administrative questions with the webinar, we ask that you use the chat function. That helps members of our team get right to you and help you resolve those issues. So we are excited today to introduce Clara Cogswell, who is the Community Support Hydrologist at CUAHSI. Clara is located in Boston, has a bachelor's degree in geology and a master's degree in hydrogeology. She now works with the water community through CUAHSI's data infrastructure. And you'll be able to reach out to Clara and ask her any follow-up questions at her email, which I think will be shared in the slides. So I'm going to stop talking and let Clara get on with her webinar today. I'll stop sharing my screen and you can give it a go, Clara. Thanks for coming today.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. I will share my slides. So yeah, thank you. As Ashley said, my name is Clara Cogswell and I'm the Community Support Hydrologist at CUAHSI. I don't tend to assume that people know an extensive amount about CUAHSI, so I'll just say that CUAHSI is the consortium of universities for the advancement of hydrologic science, Inc. We are a 501(c)(3) nonprofit funded in part by the National Science Foundation. There are kind of two halves to CUAHSI. We offer both education and outreach services and data services, and we also maintain and administer HydroShare, which is what we'll be talking about today. So on our two branches, CUAHSI Education and Outreach offers things like grants and fellowships, workshops and trainings. We co-host the National Water Center Summer Institute. We convene cyber seminar series and host the CUAHSI Virtual University. Our data services, which I'll be talking in more detail about today, include apps and repositories. So we have two repositories right now, HydroShare, which is file agnostic and is the one I'll be talking about today, and HIS, Hydrologic Information Systems, which is time series data specific and is currently undergoing a modernization. And we have our compute services, our apps like MATLAB Online, CUAHSI JupyterHub, and CUAHSI Hydro Client. And I'll be talking more about our apps later in the presentation as well. So what is HydroShare? It's an open source data repository for the water community. And there are some really nice things about HydroShare that are desirable in any repository you decide to put your data in. First among them, is data access control at various levels, allowing for both privacy and collaboration, a landing page for your data, a persistent URL for your data, and if you want, a persistent digital object identifier upon publication. There's searchability for the data that is inside HydroShare, both in HydroShare and externally on Google Dataset Search, and HydroShare offers domain specificity. So through it being a repository for the water community, You can trust that this is where your peers and people who are doing research and work in your field are also storing their data. And it automatically generates a citation for your data set, whether it's published or not. And it's worth noting that all services associated with HydroShare are free of charge. All of our compute services are also free of charge. Sorry, I saw something come up in the chat. So, and we do all of this with the goal in mind of promoting FAIR data standards. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this acronym. It stands for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable. There's many different parts to each of the parts of this acronym, but when something is findable, data are assigned a globally unique and persistent identifier, such as the persistent URL or the DOI. Metadata are retrievable by their identifier using a standardized communication protocol. Interoperable, meaning metadata uses a formal, accessible, shared, and broadly applicable language for knowledge representation. And reusable, meaning metadata are richly described with a plurality of accurate and relevant attributes. And we try to make all of these things achievable and intuitive through HydroShare's interface. So FAIR data should be easily achievable by using HydroShare. So how is data organized in HydroShare? In HydroShare, data is stored within resources. So when you put data in HydroShare, you would create a resource and store the data in that resource. And that is the primary unit of digital content and discovery in HydroShare. And like it says here, it's essentially a landing page for your data that walks other users through the metadata and content in an understandable manner. There's a robust array of metadata elements that I'll go into greater detail on as we continue this talk, such as title, abstract, keywords, spatial and temporal coverage, and more at the content level. So kind of in a reductive representation of HydroShare, HydroShare is really a container for well-described data, which is the box and the paper analogy present on this slide. I find it helpful to just have a frame of reference for what I'm talking about. So this is just a quick screen grab of what a resource looks like. Here's the content section. You can see it's just a CSV and a Jupyter notebook. There's a related resource and a citation. And at the top of the resource, you can see a range of metadata, such as who the author is, how much space it consumes, when it was created, its sharing status, how many views and downloads it has. So that is kind of what we're talking about when we talk about resources, is this. So one of the things that is a key feature of HydroShare is really granular access control for the user. There are various access levels for your resource, private being the default. And when a resource is private, only the owners and explicitly added users can view the resource at all. It will not be findable in any searches, and only you and your collaborators will be able to access it. When a resource is discoverable, only the metadata is viewable. And it can be found on the Discover page, but if someone wants access to the data, they have to request access. A public resource is how it sounds. All the metadata and content are viewable and downloadable, and it will appear in searches. So anyone who comes to your resource can download all of the content. A published resource is in ways similar to a public resource in that it is discoverable both on the Discover page and in Google Dataset Search. But it differs in that it has a DOI, and the content, title, and authorship are immutable. And we'll talk a lot more about what it means to publish, how to publish, and there are any restrictions around publishing later in this talk. But it's worth noting that like a public resource is more like a living document, and a published resource is more like a book on a shelf. And when it comes to users who can access your resource, the owner of the resource can add other HydroShare users to the resource at varying degrees of access. So you can add another owner to your resource, and that owner can take any action on the resource. They can delete it, they can change the quota holder, which we'll go over in a minute, and they can remove and add other owners. They can change the content, they can change the metadata, anything. Editors can make any change to the resource except changing the sharing status, adding or removing owners from the resource, or changing the quota holder. Viewers cannot make changes to the resource, but can find and view and download the contents even if the resource sharing status is set to private. So what type of content can be uploaded? The nice thing is the answer is any type of water data can be uploaded. There are no restrictions on what can be put in HydroShare. It will accept any file extension, and some files will actually be automatically recognized and aggregated by HydroShare, and their metadata will be extracted and displayed, such as shape files, GeoTIFFs, NetCDF files. And I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. So when you create an account in HydroShare, each user is automatically allocated 20 gigabytes of storage. This is just the automatic allocation. You can actually request more storage if you need it within reason. If you need like a terabyte of storage, that would be a different conversation, but usually you can just request as much as you need by emailing help@CUAHSI.org. And a README file in Markdown or as a plain text file will be recognized by HydroShare and displayed below the content section. So here you can just see the different data aggregations, multidimensional data, feature data, raster data, time series data in certain formats, and reference time series data containing JSON. So this is a bit more of a deep dive into some of those automatically aggregating content types. Geographic features consist of files in the Esri shapefile format. And if you upload at minimum the DBF, the shape, and the SHX file, HydroShare will recognize, oh, they're uploading a shapefile, will aggregate it for you, and will display the metadata for that shapefile. Geographic rasters in the form of GeoTIFF files will also be automatically recognized and aggregated by HydroShare. Multidimensional data in the form of NetCDF files will do something similar. And time series data that is in ODM2 in the form of an SQLite file will also automatically aggregate, though it's worth noting that many people store time series data in HydroShare in different formats such as CSV, and that's perfectly fine and common. It just won't automatically aggregate the same way as an ODM2 SQLite file. Code can also obviously be stored in HydroShare. And with any code, you should always include, the way you expect users to interact with that code, any needed input files, any appropriate output files. And in this case, it's especially relevant to include a README file that describes functions and variables present in your code. And MATLAB scripts and Jupyter notebooks can be opened from your resource landing page into the corresponding app. So here's just an example of what it looks like to upload a shapefile to HydroShare and have it automatically aggregate. So here you can see I'm dragging and dropping the DBF, the SHX, and the shapefile into HydroShare. And it's syncing and it's uploaded and aggregated, and HydroShare has extracted the metadata and will display it. So metadata in HydroShare. There is a huge, a robust array of metadata options. In this case, I will have like details in the slides about how to change this metadata and this metadata template. But because we're live, it's much easier for me to just show you the metadata template. So you guys can see, okay. So this is an example resource that I often use to teach people how to create resources on HydroShare. You can see that I am the author and the owner. And I'm going to put this resource in edit mode so you can see all of the different metadata options. You can see my title describes what the resource is for and what it's about, so no one's ever confused what it's about. If I make changes to it, I can save my changes. I can add authors if I want to, other HydroShare users, and then I can drag and drop those authors into the correct order. I can make changes to my abstract. This abstract just says what this resource is. If I make changes, I can save them as well. Below, you have subject keywords, which are essential to the discovery of your resource. So if I wanted to add another one, do that. You can see that I use the CZNet keyword a lot. All right, it has updated my resource, and you can see that it says deleting all keywords will set the resource sharing status to private, because it would be extremely difficult to discover a resource with no descriptive subject keywords. You can also add spatial coverage. So you can see here that I have dropped a pin, but you can also use a box. And when I drag and drop, HydroShare will autofill the points, the 4 points of the box. You can also write the place name here. Or you can just drop the point like I've done here and save your changes. If there's a specific start and end date to the project, or there's a data collection period, you can specify temporal coverage here. And then here is the content section. And whenever you see this little YouTube logo, it just means that there's a YouTube video that will also show you how to interact with this aspect of the resource landing page. This is the content section. You can see I have a single example file in here. It's just an Excel sheet filled with random integers. But if I want to add more files, I can either drag and drop files into this content section, or I can click add files and it will browse my computer. I can also add a link that links out to an external website here. But it's worth noting, if you put a link into the content section, the resource cannot be published with a link in the contents, because we cannot guarantee that what that links out to is always going to be maintained, is always going to be at the same address. So resources with links in the contents cannot receive a formal DOI. If I want to, I can click on this and I can add metadata at the content level, temporal coverage, spatial coverage. And if I add spatial coverage here, I can actually set my, so if I wanted to designate spatial coverage here, once I had done that, I could actually go up and set the spatial coverage here from the content files. Additional metadata, such as key value pairs, can be added here. And then this is actually a metadata field that we developed in partnership with the Internet of Water, that allows you to relate your resource to other related geospatial features. So say I wanted to search any HUC4s that intersected with my geographic coverage. You can see that it has autofilled this HUC that encompasses my geographic coverage. And now my resource is connected to, or is programmatically connected to this HUC4. Related resources. So this is useful, for example, if the content in this resource was referenced by a paper or by a report that you had generated, you can say the content of this resource is referenced by, and then you can put the citation or the link to whatever that is. And then you can put the link or the citation to this resource in the references of the report or the paper. And then you have a closed loop between your paper and your resource. You can also, if you have code or something in here, or model files, you can say the content of this resource can be executed by. Funding agencies is what it sounds like. NSF, NASA, USGS, whatever you need. Contributors, you can say either an existing HydroShare user or someone else contributed in this capacity to the resource. Say, for example, one person did the modeling and another person did the data analysis. You could specify that here. And then you have your citation. You can see that there is not a DOI in my citation because this is not published, but it's letting me know that if I decided to publish this resource, this would be my DOI. So I can copy that citation. And then finally is the license. You can select what license this content should be shared under. And then below, there's a space for comments. If someone had a question about your resource, they could leave it there. So that is a kind of a whirlwind tour of the resource landing page metadata options. I'll go back into view mode.
Claire, we have a quick question. I just wanted to, actually have a couple, so I thought I'd stop. The first is HydroShare accessible internationally?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. And another question that came up earlier asked, if someone would like to be engaged with the HydroClient modernization effort or stay in the loop about this, how could they do so, or is that possible? There was an answer typed into the Q&A, but I just wanted to voice that aloud and just for others who, I don't know if everybody can see the Q&A. Yeah,
so Jared did answer it. we are looking for beta testers, as Jared said, and we're in the process of modernization right now. So we're not necessarily putting out regular updates about it, but it's currently in progress. And I think that if you wanted to beta test, you might be able to reach out to Martin Sewell, our technical director.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Not at this time. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. So that was kind of a whirlwind tour of the metadata template. So to make a resource, you would click this button, create, and hover over resource. It says a resource can include multiple files without file format limitations. You would click this button and it would generate the landing page for your resource, at which time you would enter your title and your abstract, any subject keywords, and ultimately you would enter your content. So the title should be descriptive of the content of the resource, and the abstract should put the contents of the resource into context, including the rationale for the data collection or modeling, and should be a specific description of the content files included in the resource. So basically, you want to make it clear how you expect users to interact with the content in your resource. You can also add users, and this is one of those things where I'm just once again going to show you how to do it, but this slide will be in the slide deck and be sent out afterwards so that people can reference it. It's one of those things that's kind of confusing to tell about, easier to show. So on my resource, I'll hit manage who has access. It's this little person with a plus icon. And in this access management panel, you have all user access controls. So this top section says who has access. And right now you can see there are two owners on this resource. Me and Emily Clark, another employee at CUAHSI, are the owners. And you can see that Emily is the quota holder for this resource, meaning she is the user for whom this resource consumes storage, right? It's eating into her 20 gigabytes of storage. So you can see that I can be removed as the owner, but Emily cannot because she's holding the quota. But if we change the quota holder to me, Emily could be removed from the resource. The next panel is give access. So I can give access to other users. For example, I can add Martin, our technical director, if I want to. And I can add Martin as a viewer, an editor, or an owner. So I would say Martin is an owner. Oh no, there we go. I can just click add, and there he is. I can also remove him if I want to. And if I want to add a group, and we'll be going over groups in detail in a little bit, I can add CUAHSI. And you'll notice that I go to add CUAHSI, and CUAHSI can only be added as a viewer or an editor. Groups cannot be owners of resources because ownership always stays at the depositor level in HydroShare. Next, we have sharing status, which I went over a bit earlier, but you can see that this resource is currently private. I can change it to discoverable, and you can see it says metadata is public, but data is protected. Once it's discoverable, it means that the resource can be found, but if someone wants access to the content files, they have to reach out to you and ask for them. Public is what it sounds like, as I mentioned earlier, meaning anyone can find it and download my single random integer Excel sheet that I have in the content section. But right now I'll keep it private. And if I want to, say if I was submitting this resource along with a paper or something to be reviewed, I could enable private link sharing. So it's private, but I can send the link to the resource to someone and they can view anonymously the contents of the resource. And then when I don't want that to be possible anymore, I can unclick private link sharing. And this just allows people to review your contents without you having to give them explicit access in case they need to be anonymous. You can toggle it off and on. And finally is the storage section. And you can see, as I said earlier, Emily is the quota holder for this resource. But if Emily decides that this resource is just too big and it's eating too much of her storage, I can change it to myself or I can change it to Martin, and then it will be consuming our storage. And you can see the size is 20 kilobytes. So that is the user access control panel. Up here, you can see there are several other options. I can also copy the resource, create a new version of the resource, or delete it.
Claire, we have someone who asked, what's on the near-term feature roadmap?
For HydroShare?
I'm
A feature
assuming-
roadmap.
Mhm. What's on the near-term feature roadmap? I'm assuming what they mean is what's coming up for features. I'm not really sure of the question. If you don't understand it, I certainly don't. But if you are the person who typed that question, if you want to type another question to clarify, that'd be great.
Yeah, I would assume that that kind of means like what features are upcoming to HydroShare? And if it's all right, I'll answer that question like more toward the end of the talk after we've gone over the existing features, because it's a little bit of a longer conversation.
Sounds
or
good.
A longer answer, if that's all right.
Yep, we'll circle back to that one.
Awesome. So using the Discover page, I've mentioned earlier and several times, resources being discovered or searched, being searchable, being discoverable. So in that case, we're talking about the Discover page, which searches HydroShare internally. So you have a lot of different filter options like author, owner, subject, contributors, content type. So say you only wanted time series data, or you only wanted Jupyter notebooks, or say you only wanted published resources, for example. Now all of the resources that are coming up are only published resources. You can also discover them spatially using the map interface, which is expandable. So if I click down into them, it will take me to the resource that is represented by this pin. There's also free text search right here. And yeah, so if your resource is public, discoverable, or published, it will appear in searches on this page. Okay, publishing. So I talked about publishing at the beginning, and I've said a few things about it, but publishing is the act of requesting a DOI for your data set in HydroShare. And public and published take on distinct meanings in HydroShare. A published resource has a digital object identifier that has been minted through Crossref. And it is an immutable set of content files that cannot be changed. It will be discoverable on the Discover page and Google Dataset Search. It cannot be private. If it has a DOI, it must be accessible. And you can use these DOIs kind of in perpetuity. It will represent the contents of that data set. And the reason it is immutable is because, like I said, a published resource is like a book on a shelf. The citation can never change, so you can't change the authorship or the title. And the contents, the DOI always needs to point to the same content. Whereas a public resource does not have a DOI. You have not taken the publish action on a public resource. It can still be discovered on the Discover page, and viewers can download the contents, but you can make any changes you want to a public resource. So it's a little bit more like a living document. Say you were continuously collecting new time series data and you wanted to always be able to add to that content section. You would want to keep it public so you could continuously add to it or change it. But a published resource would be a static set of contents that you always want to represent one amount of data. And I have an example of a published resource. Oop. So here's a recently published resource, Preferential Flow Between Rivers and Aquifers in Alluvial Floodplains. It was published the other day and it has 164 views. You can see it's well described. And the contents are as follows. And you can see down here is the DOI and the citation. So in order to publish and receive a DOI, a resource has to meet a minimum metadata standard, and that's to make sure that only well-described resources are being published, because a DOI is permanent. So a published resource has to have a title of at least 30 characters. The abstract must be at least 300 characters, must have at least 3 descriptive subject keywords, and must conform to community guidelines. i.e. it must be appropriate. It can't be pictures of your cat. The abstract can't be the same character 300 times. So once a resource has these things, it can be submitted for publication, at which time a member of CUAHSI staff will lightly review it to ensure that it is appropriate. So I will go in and make sure that it's not pictures of your cat and that your abstract isn't the same character 300 times. But after that, once it has been approved, your DOI will be minted through Crossref, and this process shouldn't take more than a couple of hours, but honestly is usually complete within a few minutes. And then your DOI will be ready for use, and the citation at the bottom of the page will be updated. So communities and groups. HydroShare has these features to enable collaboration on the platform. A group is a feature that allows users to more easily share resources with their collaborators. So it's a group of other users, and it creates a shared landing page for group resources. Groups can be viewers and editors of resources, as I showed you earlier, but not owners, and anyone can create a group. So if I go to the collaboration page, I would click here. I would go into groups. Hopefully it will load promptly. And I could create my own group, or I could search existing groups and click into one and request to join it. Communities, a community is a group of groups, and it can be created for you by the HydroShare team. And basically it allows groups to share resources to a larger organization while retaining ownership at the depositor level. Computing, we'll touch on another group here when we talk about computing. So you would join the CUAHSI Cloud Computing group to use our compute services. And it is here, so CUAHSI Cloud Computing. And the reason we request that you join our cloud computing group to use our compute services is just because we want to make sure that nothing nefarious is happening with our compute services, or that you're not using it to like mine for Bitcoin or something. But we have several computing services. MATLAB Online is a MATLAB cloud computing environment, and resources stored in HydroShare containing MATLAB content can be opened directly into MATLAB Online. And then you can operate on them, do data analysis in MATLAB Online if you want to, and then you can actually save the products back to your HydroShare resource. And this MATLAB Online license is free to use with your HydroShare account. You just need to join the compute team, or the compute group. And requests to join that group are approved very quickly. CUAHSI JupyterHub similarly is a cloud computing environment with several server options. So you have Python, this is the server options for CUAHSI JupyterHub, Python, R, RStudio, and several others. And these are especially useful not only for reproducible science, but also in workshop and educational settings. Say you were hosting a workshop and you wanted everyone to be able to access one Jupyter notebook or one MATLAB script, you could use MATLAB Online or CUAHSI JupyterHub in your workshop, also to like collaborate with your peers. And HydroShare on Jupyter, when you launch CUAHSI JupyterHub, HydroShare on Jupyter allows you to make changes to notebooks saved in resources and then save the changes back to the resource. With other types of content, if you want to make changes to it, you have to take down the old version and replace it with a newer version. HydroShare on Jupyter allows you to make changes to your Jupyter notebook and then push those changes back to your HydroShare resource without having to manually make that switch. And Tony Castronova is the head of our compute team, and he can support you if you need help with CUAHSI, with workshops using CUAHSI data and compute infrastructure. So that is all to say that CUAHSI Data Services tries to support your data over the whole data lifecycle. We hope that HydroShare is useful for that in making your data fair and in treating your data as a first-class research product. There are lots of resources to help users learn how to use HydroShare. We hope that it's fairly intuitive, but we know that there are lots of questions associated with storing, publishing, and describing data. So written documentation is available at help@cuahsi.org, or you can simply go to this help tab, and that's what that is. And here is all of the documentation you could ever possibly want. There's also a series of short YouTube videos called HydroShare How To that are available on our YouTube channel that are each about 3 minutes in length and show you how to do various things within HydroShare. And if you would like an introduction to HydroShare webinar or a hands-on workshop for your organization or group, you can also just reach out. If you have any questions or issues, you can contact me, Clara, at ccogswell@quasi.org or help@quasi.org. I'm also on the other end of that. And yeah, that is my introduction to HydroShare. I would love to answer some more questions and also think about this question. What is on, okay, we have can data be streamed to a non-published resource programmatically?
So we actually have a couple. Let me just read them out just to make sure everybody hears them and can get them. So the first question is, can data be streamed to a non-published resource programmatically? For example, integration with sensors via an API or other means.
I do know that people push data to HydroShare resources programmatically. There is no built-in feature that is native to HydroShare that allows for real-time updating from a sensor, but plenty of people do write scripts that programmatically replace files in HydroShare resources or add files to HydroShare resources.
It's great, thank you. Another question we have, is the cloud computing group available to all user types?
Yes, so there's not really user types, there's just one type of user and it's available to everyone. If you tried to join the cloud computing group and you were clearly like a nefarious actor, your request would not be approved, but users are generally approved. There's no like premium subscription, any user can join the cloud computing group.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to circle back around to a couple of questions that were posted earlier. One is a question about whether or not there has been interest or is interest in supporting a way to export HydroShare citations directly to a software like EndNote.
So we aren't currently in talks about a feature like this. Right now, the extent of it would be you can copy, someone linked a GitHub issue. Oh, it's on the HydroShare board, December 30th, 2020. So we aren't currently, so they said, I know your team has a lot of things to work on. This is true. We have many kind of like really wonderful features that we would love to incorporate into HydroShare. And it's just kind of a matter of resources that we can allocate to any of those ideas at any given time. We have so many like wonderful community ideas and contributions like this one. It just comes down to, what do we have the resources to work on at any given time? So right now, the closest thing that I can offer you in regards to automatically exporting a citation, it's really just you can copy the citation and that our DOI prefix is very predictable. You can always know what a DOI is going to be because this, let's just go to any random one. So you can see this alphanumeric string. Oh, am I still sharing my screen? I'm not.
You're not sharing your screen. You can share it again though, if you'd like,
okay.
Especially for those who are going to watch this later on video. They won't see the Q&A. Yeah.
So you can see this alphanumeric identifier at the end of the URL of your resource. That is your HydroShare, it's your resource identifier. And your DOI for your resource is going to be our DOI prefix plus this alphanumeric identifier. So unfortunately, we do not currently have a way to automatically export citations to things like EndNote. That does not mean that it's not a really valuable idea, though.
Great, thank you for that. We have another new question that popped up before we circle back around to that last one about future work. I wanted to grab this question really quickly. Is there a training environment where we can test out the features of HydroShare without affecting the live data?
So the resource that I showed you that had just like there's not like a beta that you can test on, but the nice thing is you can make as many resources as you want and like mess them up really bad without really any consequences. as long as you don't like publish them. And I wouldn't approve a resource for publication that was clearly just a test resource. But what it would be is you can make as many resources as you want that are kind of like the one that I showed you that are like test resource. Here I'm testing, aggregating shape files. And there's no consequences for that. You can mess around in HydroShare as much as you need to in order to get a feel for it. And you can, because there's not really a concept of live data in HydroShare, it's all like static files, and it's a copy of your file. You can do whatever you want to it without the possibility of affecting your local copy. I hope that's helpful.
Oh, and then we have another new question that popped up. What kind of reliability checks are applied to data that's uploaded to HydroShare to increase its trustworthiness? Yeah,
so that's a really good question. The reliability check will be when you go to publish, I will go in, or a member of CUAHSI staff will go in to make sure that the resource kind of is what it says it is. But as a matter of policy, we do not internally interrogate files in HydroShare because HydroShare is domain specific. Our depositors are all doing something in the universe of water data. We don't raise any barriers to entry for putting data on HydroShare and making it public. People can comment on data if they want to and say, like, I looked at this data and I think that it's missing this, or I think that it needs to be cleaned. And that is kind of a way for community feedback to be applied to data. But in general, because HydroShare is also a collaborative space, which you can use to share data with your collaborators, with people who are also working on your data, we don't expect all data put into HydroShare to be in its final, like, perfect state. And so for that reason, the quality check that we do is at the end of the process before you publish your data to ensure that it's well described. So I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. And I have this one last question I'm going to get you to circle back and talk about. But before I do, just remind everybody, we have a few minutes left, and if you have a question you'd like to ask, to please put it in the Q&A. You also should see a survey, a poll that came up on your screen. If you'll please take a few minutes to complete the survey, that gives us valuable feedback on your experience. Okay, and so we have another question. Does HydroShare support API?
HydroShare has an API, and for example, if you wanted to integrate an app or something with HydroShare through the API, you would be able to do that. Our API has pretty extensive documentation. And recently, we've done a few projects like that where we've helped people integrate like groundwater modeling softwares or water modeling softwares with HydroShare, so that through our API, so that they could push results from the groundwater modeling simulations into HydroShare through the API.
Great. And then we have another question. Are you measuring or planning to measure the citations to published HydroShare resources across journals and reports? It would be great, they say, for an impact factor for HydroShare.
So we do actually a few times a year go in and check and see how many times our DOI prefix has been used in publications. And we also, from Crossref, through whom we mint our DOIs, receive a resolution report that lets us know kind of like what our top resolved resources are each month, and if we have any DOIs that are failing for some reason. And that's not typical. Most DOI failures are the result of human error when typing the DOI. But so we do gather those metrics a few times a year. And once a month, we get a report from Crossref letting us know what type of resolution activity is happening with our DOIs.
Great. Okay, so now I'm going to let you circle back around to this original question, asking about, future features that you plan on incorporating into HydroShare, and give you some time to respond to that question. And again, remind folks, if you have a question, now's the time to put it in the Q&A to give us a few minutes to answer here at the end.
Yeah, so in terms of the near-term future feature roadmap, one of the things that is currently ongoing is improvements to the communities function. You can tell that right now, like anyone can make a group, but at the moment, a community has to be set up for you by the HydroShare team. We're hoping to make that more accessible and make it so that users can interact in a more useful way with communities moving forward. So that's one thing that we're working on. We're also, as someone mentioned previously, looking toward highlighting high traffic and highly visited resources in HydroShare. So we are looking at implementing kind of a like a letterboard of monthly frequently visited resources that are published so that people can see what resources is the community taking interest in at this time. And that would be on a 30-day rolling window, kind of what are the high traffic resources in HydroShare at this moment.
That's great. Thank you so much. So we have a few more minutes. I also just want to remind everybody that this webinar will be shared on our website, the internetofwater.org, as well as on our YouTube page for the Internet of Water. If you follow us on Twitter, you'll see a notification come out when those links are live and available. You'll get not only the video, but also a copy of the slides that Clara presented today. So without any other questions in the Q&A, we do have a last question. Is there a way to connect with the rest of the HydroShare community members interested in academic research and publishing?
Actually, we have a like a CUAHSI community channel, and within that there's a HydroShare group. So that is one way to do it. And there's also kind of being subscribed to our newsletter through which there's often HydroShare updates, things like that. And there's also like fellowship announcements, new feature announcements. When new things happen with HydroShare, it's also always there. Yeah, and you can request to join our CUAHSI community channel on Slack.
Well, this has been great. I am not a data person necessarily, and I really feel like I learned something today and could follow.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you.
So I appreciate a great presentation and demo of the product. And we appreciate you taking your time to share this with everybody. So thank you so much. We're going to end the webinar, and we appreciate all of your participating today, and look for information for our next upcoming webinar in the series. Thanks again.
Thank you.